Hi sir, so basically this is the conversations that we do under this group ELM that we have called Bargal, under which we are trying to understand soft power, India's capacity in soft power, and to understand diversity and culture heritage of India, interviewing artists, policy makers who work in this field and understand that. We thought that it'd be opportune, since you're here, to talk to you about it, try to get your understanding of what your interactions with country's diversity, country's culture, both intra-country and inter-country has been. So first question, of course, is what do you think is India's soft power? What do you think is our heritage? What do you think is our culture? What do you think has been the influence of India's culture in the world?
Yeah, so I think a few things come to mind when we talk about India and soft power. I think the tradition of public debate, public discussion, and public reasoning is very central to India. And even though the feature of a modern democracy in that sense might be, however, recent, but we're going back centuries, and historically we see how much public debate and discussion has influenced social norms, social thinking, and fascinating debates about the meaning of life, about philosophical questions, that very few cultures have been able to do that. And this is not on religion, and it's unfortunate when this tradition is linked to any particular religion, but it is a continuous, and given that we were a hugely oral tradition, this idea of people with different viewpoints, different philosophies, different perspectives, openly and fearlessly debating, discussing is something absolutely essential to India. And when I see that kind of tradition being eroded or being suppressed, then there is a serious crisis. That's something which is worrying. Whether it is done by the press, whether it is done by the political parties in power, or whether it is done for whatever reason, fear of free expression is a concern. But I think that element is very important. The second one, that of course when you talk about India and soft power, is this whole, what Gandhi brought to the discourse of non-violent measures. I think that also is a very, if you ask around, India would probably be the first country that comes to mind when you talk about non-violence, and Gandhi and the influence that he had on using the soft power of non-violence to change the entire global discourse on colonialism, the discourse on conflict resolution, and so on. I think that is the second big contribution to at least this development sector. And the last one I would think, when you're talking about India's soft power, is really the way in which let me just rephrase it. Let me back off and say, these are the two positive features, but let me also highlight a few of the downside of soft power, which means that you begin to use, the first two that I'm giving you are examples where these two traditions can be used for positive development. But there are also many aspects of soft power which are detrimental to a country. So it should not be that we are using soft power. We think that soft power, because power can be used to do good things and power can be used to do very bad things also. And that is what I mean. So the positive spirit, if I were to rephrase it, I think we can use the power, strength of soft power through public reasoning, through public debates, through discussions to advance human progress. We can use the positive strength of soft power to promote non-violent resolution to conflict and wars and internal strife. And so on. But then the downside of it is that India has been, there are several instances where the strength of soft power has been used to the detriment of Indian society. For me, nothing is more shocking than how patriarchy has been fueled by this practice of, by this actually, what should I say, taking away of control and power by men over women, the subjugation of women. It's all elements of soft power. There is nothing illegal about it, there's nothing. But it is absolutely shocking. The use of violence, domestic violence, the use of violence against children. I mean, that parents are saying that the only way to discipline children is by beating them. I mean, levels of corporal punishment are huge. Today, the National Family Health Survey, the fourth one, says almost over 50% of women agree that a husband is justified in beating the wife. I mean, that is the abuse of soft power. That it's a society where you let extreme forms of violence, while I did talk about non-violent movements resolve, but we have also ingrained in it, the soft power has ingrained disrespect, inequality, abuse of power, and complete use of authority with impunity to target children and target women. And I think that is really a very sad part of the soft power that we have. Now, very few examples of change happening. And this is what we have to see when you look at where we are sitting today in Haryana. The economic progress that we notice around is astounding. And there are villages where you go now, what hardly villages, but from here to Chandigarh is a straight dhaba to dhaba, hand-holding dhaba culture. And you see SUVs, you see very rich people, you see televisions, all the signs of improvements in the standards of living are taking place. So there is a convergence of sorts when it comes to standards of living between the rich and the poor. But then there's a huge divergence, I find, in the attitude of people in the state, particularly Haryana, to young girls and women. Why is that happening? You know, the convergence in the space of physical standards of living, and the huge divergence. And so if you talk to young people here, why are they being so traumatized by the authority of the father, by the authority of the family, by the authority of the panchayat? Complete suppression of freedom. There is a complete suppression of freedom. And the panchayat's power, I don't think you can call it hard power. It is very soft power. It is exercise of some idea of justice, which is completely baseless. When you deny young girls, saying you can't wear jeans, you can't carry cell phones, you can't go out of the house, you can't meet this fellow because he belongs to another caste. So where are we going with our soft power on this? So I think that is the tension that I see.
Sir, you say this, and yet, I mean, it is interesting because the ruling party now actually claims to represent the culture of India, or represents to want to resurrect the culture of India. So there is that element where it is trying to go back to the roots. We have a political party that seems to be saying that we are trying to go back to the roots. And yet there is a contest in what the roots are in the first place. And that's where the debate and the contradiction lies. So do you see that if the ruling party is at loggerheads with what according to you is soft power, do you think that there is a misunderstanding, or there is...
Be straight and talk about Hinduism. Right? Now, does the BJP represent Hindus? Of course not. Do they represent the idea of Hinduism? Of course not. Now, Hinduism, as they all admit, is broad enough. I might be a Hindu and an atheist. But how can you, has every Hindu to be believing in God? No. So what is this idea of Hinduism that they are bringing and saying this is the traditional cultural tradition of Hinduism? Forget the religion. Is this a cultural tradition of Hinduism? No. Is it the cultural tradition of India? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have had Charvakas who are with their own philosophy. We allowed that also. We have had Jains, we have had different people with different reasoning. That is Indian culture. That is the richness of Indian culture. And if any party today comes and tells me that they are now representing Indian culture and they are trying to go back to the roots of Indian culture, that's completely wrong, unacceptable. Now, as a Hindu, I don't believe in caste. What do they believe in? Does the Hindu tradition tell you that you must believe in castes and untouchability? I have no problem with interreligious marriages. I am an Indian. So how can they say that this is against Indian tradition and it's not? I mean, Hindus and Muslims are marrying for a long time. You suddenly revive a new notion of exclusive Hinduism of yours.
Because often it doesn't come in our head like whenever we talk about or whenever we think of this country, which is the children of this country, right? Like the more the importance of being children, the importance of the fact that you worked so much with UNICEF and policy and all. So how do you see children featuring in this whole idea of culture and soft power and diversity?
And moving forward, what sort of policies with using the children who are going to be the youth of tomorrow, and how can India move forward with that respect?
So I think I would argue that India is among the handful of countries where children are not allowed to enjoy childhood. And principally because of fear that is instilled in them. It is fear of the father, it is sometimes fear of the mother, it is fear of the teacher, it is fear. And I think fear robs children of all the joys of childhood. How can a child grow up in a house where the child is terrified, feels completely stifled in terms of what to do, what not to do? And that really explains why a large number of delinquent behaviors that you see among young people, adolescents, is largely because of suppression of any kind of freedom of expression and so on. Second is, I think the way the child is brutally conditioned to grow up in an undemocratic space of authority and suppression is just unacceptable. So if you're really asking me what should we do what is the future of India's children, yes, we have to do a lot in health, in nutrition, after all, some 35% of children under 5 are stunted. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot to do with the quality of education. We have a lot to do with only 2/3 of 63% of children are fully immunized in this country today. So there's much to do in health, much to do in this area. But for me, the fundamental change has to be, if you're talking about this soft power kind of thing, it is not, you can have all the basic social services provided, all the schools provided, but that is not going to address the root problems that children face, which is one of denying children the opportunity to express themselves, of stifling any kind of creativity in children. And really, even if you look at our education system and the drive of parents today for children to perform, suicide is the largest cause of death among youth today. Why? More girls are committing suicide than boys. What is the reason for boys committing suicide? Young boys. It is the pressure from parents to perform well in studies. Why are girls committing suicide today, young girls? The main reason that's coming out is family disagreement about whom to marry. What kind of a society are we? So looking forward, I really feel that all of us have to break tradition, if you call that tradition, and culture. We have to break tradition. We have to really stand up. And I think I always feel that the onus on young men and boys is much more than us all the time talking about girls. I think Indian young men have to really stand up and get counted today and say, we are not going to allow this, we are not going to do this. And I think that the change has to come with young men and young boys saying, listen, we will respect gender equality, we will treat women and young girls with respect, and that we are not going to allow any of this nonsense that young men start perpetuating. You can put it all on tradition and culture, that this is how young boys behave, this is the way masculinity, if you have to be counted as a man, this is what you have to do. These are symbols of masculinity. All those have to change. if we really want to see genuine advancement of a bright future for children, which includes girls as well.
So just adding on to that, like what would your advice be to the next generation to carry forward as India's soft power? So like the next generation, what should we carry forward saying this is India, this is what we represented, this is the soft power
Because
that we would like to have.
And the reason why this question is important is because him and me also listen to rock only. So it's not like we have deep respect for, MS Subbalakshmi or somebody like that.
Yeah.
So my point is, even when we are given agency, what are we choosing to Google in YouTube? Are we Googling Jim Morrison or are we Googling MS Subbalakshmi?
Like what should the next generation
Yeah,
take
absolutely.
forward?
So what can we do? Like, how do we change this?
Yeah, okay. So the bright side of globalization has been that as Indians have got access to huge numbers of different cultures, different music, different cuisines, different everything is there. And I think that is a very, very positive side of it. The downside of it has been that our traditional arts and cultures have got completely neglected. Completely neglected. And one of my first assignments when I started after Ahmedabad was we did a whole survey of handlooms and handicrafts industries. And at that time, in the mid-70s or late 70s, there was such a regeneration of interest in reviving Indian arts and crafts. So Popul Jaikar was there, very active. You had Marthand Singh, who revived the entire handlooms. You had Rajiv Sethi, who was doing these festivals of India across the world. I myself worked very closely with Rajiv on a number of projects, including the famous Pule Visve Kalakar Sehkari Samiti, which was a cooperative society of traditional artists and puppeteers. So I spent my first 7 years of my working life after Ahmedabad. I am going every day to build that cooperative society of artisans, puppeteers, performers, and so on. But what we find over there, over the years, is that the patronage is gone. So in the traditional years, it was the patronage of the royal families. So the darbars, the same. Then the state was giving the patronage after independent India. And so you had all these emporiums and traditional artists. But today the state has really withdrawn that patronage. We're talking about something called cultural industry, but it's hardly a market-driven industry. And so a lot of skills are disappearing. It's very sad. We talked about Madhubani paintings. One of my first trips to Bihar was to Madhubani. There was something called the Madhubani Craftsmen, the Master Craftsmen Association of Mithila, which was set up by a very eminent painter called Indeshwari Devi.
Yeah, Indeshwari.
Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were all in that assignment together, working to see how we can get, not allow Madhubani to die, and how you get it into our everyday lives. What we did with the Pule Visve Kalakar Sehkari Samiti was also get all the puppeteers from Rajasthan to do extraordinary carved furniture for our houses. Now you come to my house, you'll see a lot of these kinds of furniture. But you go to any modern house, into your house you will find from pepper fry and urban ladder and straight. So the house has lost its character in terms of what is India. You go to any multi-high-rise building in Gurgaon, after a point you don't know whether you're in India or in Gurgaon. So I think that how to revive that, and I think it will come back. I'm not but you also have to protect it. We cannot allow the degeneration and destruction of traditional arts. I mean, music, the Manganiyars and this music, it's been a struggle to record oral traditions, oral music. I don't know if you've seen Sahapedia.
Yeah.
What Sudha Gopalakrishnan is doing is exceptional recordings. But we don't want it to be recorded as a museum or as a historical study material. It has to be part of the living culture of India. And I think that is where the real struggle is at this point of time. How do we, and so it's also partly driven by class and caste in India. And so when I come back to say that we don't respect people, we don't treat people with dignity, It is about class and caste. Because all these puppeteers and all these, they don't belong to the so-called Brahminical castes. So you will never allow them to come to your house. You'll allow them to come to your house to perform at your wedding, but never invite them back again. So huge class issues are there. We are such a class-driven society. On the other hand, if the puppeteer happens to be from a Young India Fellow student, that fellow will be going everywhere. So these are the barriers in our thing.
So, if it's about the market, like what does an economist like you think we could do for preserving soft power? Like then let's get to economics. Like as a development economist who thinks that culture and heritage needs to be like promoted and like preserved.
If you're talking about this, there are two ways to do it. One is there is potential, and I think that potential is being of using, let's say, traditional weavings and fabrics, which the market is doing through high-end designers. And so the market will do that. The market will fabulously take it. I think every high-end designer has got an India collection or takes some motif from here. Then you have an intermediary kind of market intervention by groups like Fab India, Anokhi. And Fab India are also in the space of what John Bissell started in the 60s, the first Fab Indias, was to take traditional weavers and traditional handloom weavers and connect them to the markets in very, very clear ways. I think that same, the Fab India model is a brick and mortar model of physical shops with a little, I think they also do e-retailing. But I've also heard of, in many of the forums, several young entrepreneurs who are connecting millions or thousands of women artists through media platform, what is it called, your internet retailing. So I think that is also in a big way happening, though we don't see it happening. Then you come down to a smaller level, you have the Dastakar bazaars, that Dastakar, Dilli Haat, Dastakar. Those have in fact, earlier when we were all in the 70s and 80s, we used to have these small melas regularly, but those are all going.
It used to be institutions.
Yeah. So the market this is the market space, and there are limitations of it, and you cannot really. At one point, we were all talking about branding. Why not have they came up with some mark, I forget which one it was, like rug mark and wool mark. Why not have a handcrafted in India mark? So if you go to, so even in this market space, for example, if you go to a retail outlet and you have a counter over there saying these are handmade, if you go to even Marks and Spencer's today, and there is a counter there where you have marked products which says handcrafted in India, which means it's a sign that says that it is hand-woven and hand-spun, and the shirt costs 2,000 rupees. People will buy it. So there are extraordinary ways of marketing. I think there's huge potential to use the retail outlets of Khadi emporiums to make Khadi an absolutely fantastic modern product. So that is the potential to revive these crafts of the market. But having said that, there's a huge role for the state, because when it comes to traditional dance, music, paintings, that markets are not really able to get there. So I think the state has to invest. I mean, Kerala, I think there is what is that dance form, the martial art dance form. There's a group that for years has been not allowing it to die. But it's very difficult to sustain. Just like the state invests in museums. There are a few private museums, but all over the world. So you have to support living traditions. It cannot all become museums. So the state has an obligation to support living traditions, whether it is music, dance, whatever little we see. Of course, some of them will do very well. Bharatanatyam and Kathak and all have got their proponents. T.M. Krishna is doing, in his own way, trying to break tradition and caste and hierarchy in Carnatic music by doing some revolutionary, fascinating things. So there will be some individual, but the state has to really step in a large way and support and revive the living traditions of India.
So can you give us some insights about the current policy system that we have in place for promoting soft power, and what are the potential policy interventions that the state could bring in?
I am really not so familiar with the space of culture. I mean, I have been associated, I thought, INTAC, for example, the International Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, people like OPJ, who set up the Sanskriti Kendra, Anand Gram, and so on. I worked very closely with OPJ for many years. So INTAC has done exceptionally good work. But now, Mr. Jain, through INTAC, documented the historical monuments of Delhi in 2 volumes. They are huge volumes. Every road, colony, pictures of doors, windows are there. Now, after the documentation by INTAC, who's responsible for conservation? Reckless. I mean, if that same, you go back to everything, my suspicion is 70% would be destroyed. So you definitely need very active state intervention. So if you ask me, how can the state has to be play a watchful role. Like we are talking about the environment, take mining, extractive industries. Many countries they prescribe no-go zones. And these are based on preservation of nature, subspecies, cultural traditions, historical. So we have to get like that. When you are talking about this thing, the state has to step in and say, you have to stop, you can't do this. So I see the role of the state as both preventing the destruction, promoting the cultural traditions, which certainly need state support, and encouraging markets to pick up areas where markets can do well. Even Banarsi saris and so on, for instance. The dress culture is changing. I mean, when I go to a Tamil Nadu emporium and see that a cotton sari, handloom sari, is selling for 300 rupees in a retail outlet, I'm here sitting thinking, what does a poor weaver get? I mean, there are fantastic saris available at 300, 400 rupees even to this day. 6 yards of cloth, can you imagine? 400 rupees is beautiful. But then people have stopped wearing saris. So how do you then adapt? How do you adapt that same skill to maybe if young, you and I are not particularly keen on wearing shirts and imported shirts and so on. I go to Fab India and buy a lot of things. So, but that market has not been picked up, and I think there is some role of the state. The traditional system that handlooms and handicrafts emporiums were set up. There were handloom development corporations and handloom, but that is gone now, almost dead. If you go to Barakamba Road in Delhi, where all the emporia have, states have shops, what a brilliant idea that was. But none of them has any products left. So the mission is gone. And, so I think there is real room and potential for the state to revive these things, invest, like I said, to protect, promote, and develop, expand markets. But where is the talent? Where is the will? And who will do it is a big question.
Lovely interview. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
Absolutely no words. This was so good. It was really good. Thank you. Just for me, apart from that, just
Even yesterday I missed the
Bharti there, who's the Madhubani mentor, she's a national awardee and she's won Padma Bhushan. And she said, Vivek, all I have been asking to the government in the last 30-35 years is give us one museum where we can basically represent Mithila art. All the masters of Mithila art can come under one museum.
You heard of Vindeshwari Devi?
No, but I mean, when we discovered all of them, Vindeshwari Devi, and how Madhubani art is the only folk art form in the world which has evolved from women, only women know it and only women do it.
The only problem is it's called the Master Craftsmen Association of Mithila, MCA, because that time the word craftsperson.
Are you recording this?
No, craftsperson नहीं बोलते थे ना उस ज़माने में. So, I think the name has been, no, not Bindeshwari.
No, Vindeshwari Devi, there are two, three more. Sitla Devi.
She was saying how this art form is not appreciated. See, if it's a Bharatanatyam dancer, they are given more importance. But like art, you cannot say this art is better than this art. And like the government intervention, she feels is really really needed, and that people should know. The government should advertise these artists, like to showcase their artwork.
But I think the other group that has done very well is the
Sita Devi, Vindeshwari Devi.
Bindeshwari Devi, Master Craftsman Association of Mithila, if you do it. And I think the one form which is really done well is the tribal art form from where Chhattisgarh.
Which one?
The Varli.
No, Varli is Maharashtra.
Right.
The
Gond one. The Gond artists. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Gond is beautiful. Gond is
unbelievable.
So, have you read Himayana, this book? So Navayana is a publisher. So what they've done is basically they contacted 3 Gond artists and they said, why don't you do a biography of Bhimrao Ambedkar and paint Gond paintings of Bhimrao Ambedkar's life. So they've come out with a 113-page book,
really?
Which are basically painting Himayana, sir.
Okay.
So the book is so good. Oh my God, bro, read the book. It's so good, sir. It's basically God paintings of Ambedkar's life. So just imagine that. Like, just imagine. I'll gift it to you.
No, I'll bring it tomorrow when I can tell you.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So great.
Yeah, thanks for yesterday again.
Yeah, this conversation.